Remember way back in the trailer for this series where I mentioned that Disney had made a collaboration with Square long before Kingdom Hearts was ever conceived? In 1991, Disney commissioned a comic book to be created, adapting the newly released Final Fantasy IV, done by Kurt Busiek, Del Barris, and Mike Mignola. Yeah, Mike Mignola of Hellboy fame. Commissioned by the defunct Disney imprint Hollywood Comics, the story was to be a 4-issue adaptation of the video game Final Fantasy IV, released in 1991 in North America as Final Fantasy II. Busiek was asked by the editor to adapt an original story set in the Final Fantasy universe, with publisher Square then shifting him over to the adaptation of the then forthcoming video game. Busiek has said he wrote the script for all 4 issues, with at least 2 issues penciled by Barris and all 4 covers completed by Mignola. Hollywood Comics shuttered in 1993, and the comic has never been released. Busiek has directly stated that if the book came out, he doesn't think that Final Fantasy fans would be particularly happy with it. And heresy upon heresies, I changed things, with Squaresoft's permission. I thought it was so odd that the manly hero lead was named Cecil, and his loyal buddy was named Kane. Really? You named the loyal guy Kane? That I suggested maybe they needed Americanized names, and Squarest agreed. I don't remember what I changed them to, but Squarest liked them enough that they asked if I'd be interested in a staff position making the games more American appropriate. We never talked about it much, because I wanted to freelance. But I bet fans devoted to the game wouldn't have liked the changes, especially not from a current POV looking back. So, with the comic a bust, what exactly is Final Fantasy IV, and why is it so beloved by the fanbase? Final Fantasy IV is the 4th game in the Final Fantasy series. Originally released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the game has subsequently been re-released for the PlayStation, the WonderSwan Color, the Game Boy Advance, the Nintendo DS, the PlayStation Portable, iOS, and Android. It was originally released in North America as Final Fantasy II. This altered numbering system caused the game Final Fantasy VI to be numbered Final Fantasy III, leading to quite a bit of confusion when the PlayStation game Final Fantasy VII, which retained the number 7 outside of Japan, came out. A sequel, Final Fantasy IV: The After Years, was released for Japanese mobile phones on February 2008. The sequel was released via WiiWare in the US on June 1, 2009, and is included in Final Fantasy IV: The Complete Collection for the PlayStation Portable. The 3D remake was released for Steam on September 17, 2014. The idea behind creating Final Fantasy IV was to create an ultimate Final Fantasy game, one that would compile the good aspects of the previous 3 installments. The story-driven aspect is taken from Final Fantasy II, and the job change elements are taken from the original Final Fantasy and from Final Fantasy III. The team wanted to balance the 2 aspects, ending up with what became Final Fantasy IV. Up until then, RPGs tended to have a map, a dungeon, a castle, and boss battles, and the player progressed back and forth between gameplay and boss battles. The idea for Final Fantasy IV was to approach it from a movie editing perspective, to create a more dramatic, story-driven game. By minimizing player confusion as to where to go next in the game, the developers elevated the story-driven impact. Making Final Fantasy IV a story-driven game led to decreased level party customization compared to previous entries in the series. By adding the active time battle system, the goal was to mitigate this. The ATB system, new for Final Fantasy IV, was created by Hiroyuki Ito, who felt that battles in JRPGs would eventually be done in real time. To create a battle system as close to real time as was possible, the ATB was born. Ito felt that too many action elements would alienate users, and the theme he came up with was an action-like game without reflex action elements. One thing Ito had in mind was automatic transmission in cars, as opposed to a stick, but even if processes are automatic, the player has to have something to do lest they get bored. At the time, there was a shift going on in Formula One racing, where semi-automatic transmissions were introduced. From this, the concept where character speed would differ depending on the type of character was coined. With this system, the team could implement an action game type of gimmick where enemies will change shape or fight as a wall closing in. It was a kind of new enemy structure that hadn't appeared in a Final Fantasy game before. The original Final Fantasy IV was altered in several regards to reduce the difficulty level for Final Fantasy IV Easy Type, a version exclusive to Japan. Various spells, attributes, and items were removed or altered, shop prices were lowered, and other tweaks to make the game easy were put in place. Many enemies, attacks, and items were renamed. It's often thought the original North American translation was a translation of Easy Type, but the translated version was actually developed before Easy Type, and the difficulty is reduced even further in Easy Type than in the North American version. This has led to speculation that Easy Type was based on the North American Final Fantasy II rather than vice versa. Another aspect Easy Type changed is that some of the text was simplified to make it easier for younger Japanese players to read and to help bring the point of certain comments across more clearly. For example, when Palom clears the fire on Mount Ordeals with his Blizzard spell and brags about it, Porum reminds him that the Elder of Mysidia taught him they shouldn't be haughty. The word for haughty was replaced with the word for arrogant, as haughty is not a common word in an average child's vocabulary. Final Fantasy IV Easy Type is roughly similar to the game released in North America, but the game lost some content to censorship and poor translation when localized. References to religious imagery and names were removed, violence and death were toned down or removed entirely, and various names were changed in all aspects of the game. Square did not have much of a localization team set up for the project, which made the localization a rocky one, such as the team working till late rewriting the text the best they could without ever having played the game. This led to Square wanting to set up a proper localization team to oversee future localization projects, and to translate the game text and manual. This version was developed in North America, and Takashi Tokita has later recalled the troubles they had developing a game overseas during a time with no internet. The team copied everything onto disk, but when Tokita arrived to the States, he realized he'd left it back in Japan and it had to be sent over on a later day. After the work was finished, it took around a 2 to 3 month manufacturing process to have all the ROMs created. The reason for making the US version easier was because Japan already had 3 Final Fantasy games, whereas the first Final Fantasy was the only one released in the States. Final Fantasy II and Final Fantasy III had experimental elements, and so it was thought a challenge for US players to dive straight into Final Fantasy IV. It was decided to balance it out by presenting Final Fantasy IV as a follow-up to the first Final Fantasy, and thus it was simplified and named Final Fantasy II. This change was also made with the younger players in mind. Did you know that currently this game is the only PlayStation 1 remake of a console Final Fantasy game that is yet to be released on the US PlayStation 3's PlayStation 4 as a PS1 classic, but it's available on the Japanese PlayStation Store. Final Fantasy IV was released for the Nintendo DS as part of the Final Fantasy 20th Anniversary campaign. The game was developed by Matrix Software, the team responsible for the Final Fantasy III remake, and was supervised by members of the original development team. Takashi Tokita serves as executive producer, Tomoya Osano as producer, Hiroyuki Ito as a battle designer. Animator Yoshinoro Kanata storyboarded the new cutscenes. The game was released in America on July 22, 2008. According to executive producer Takashi Tokita, scenario writer of the original release, 3/4 of the original script had been cut from the Super Famicom release, but some of this lost material was reworked into the remake, while some new events were added. The player has the ability to use the Nintendo DS stylus to move around similarly to Final Fantasy III's remake, while new minigames require the use of the stylus. The game features an ability system, which adds a degree of replay to the game, as well as a New Game Plus feature and the Quick Save, which allows the player to save the current position, regardless of where, in a file that's deleted upon loading. An auto battle system allows the player to leave the party's battle actions up to commands set in the abilities menu outside of battle. Did you know that Final Fantasy IV The After Years references optional side quests, obtaining Iridia's strongest Eidolons, obtaining the knife from Sheila, and fighting the lunar subterrane bosses, thereby cementing them all as canon? Final Fantasy IV Complete Collection was released on PlayStation Portable in April 2011. and includes remakes of both Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy IV The After Years. It also includes a new scenario, Final Fantasy IV Interlude, which connects the original game's story with that of the After Years. The Kingdom of Baron has begun an unprovoked military campaign against other countries. Lord Captain Cecil Harvey and the Red Wings Air Force attack the wizard's town Mysidia and seize the water crystal. Deeply disturbed by his actions, Cecil asks the king why he is being given such orders. The king strips Cecil of his rank, and when Cecil's friend Cain Highwind speaks up for him, the king orders them both to Mist to kill its eidolon and deliver a Cornelian signet. Cecil's love, Rosa Joanna Farrell, and old friend Cid Polydenia try to assuage his self-loathing before he departs, although they too are disturbed by Baron's actions. On a quick side note, in Final Fantasy IV's Japanese scenario guide, it states that Cecil's sword, the Deathbringer, originally belonged to Leonhardt, i.e. Leon, a main character in Final Fantasy II. So, would this mean that the King of Barons actually Leon? He had Cecil trained in that art. Some translations specifically state that he trained him directly, and that upon the king's death he becomes the summon eidolon Odin, thus meaning he's redeemed himself for his past actions in Final Fantasy II? Leon did leave Firion and the rest, saying he was unable to ever be forgiven, though Firion said he would always be welcomed back to them at a later point. If Final Fantasy II and Final Fantasy IV are connected, given the whole Cain, Mysidia, Troya, all that stuff, is it possible that Leon just left and founded a kingdom? Possibly in the realms of Palamecia? Who knows? Nothing's ever stated other than this quick mention, but it's kind of something interesting to think about. Cecil and Cain fight their way through the Mist Cave and defeat the dragon eidolon that guards the exit. When they arrive in the village, the Cornelian signet releases bombs, which raise the buildings and kill most of the inhabitants. They find a young girl named Rydia mourning her mother, the dragon's summoner, who was killed by the death of her eidolon. The two men are horrified that they are sent to slaughter a town and resolve to oppose Baron. When Cecil apologizes to the girl and tries to take her to safety, Rydia is enraged and summons Titan. When the earthquake stops, Cain is gone and Rydia is unconscious. Cecil brings Rydia to Kaipo, the nearest town. Baron's soldiers arrive during the night to kill Rydia, but Cecil fights them off and earns her trust. The next day, they find that Rosa followed Cecil to the town and came down with desert fever. As the only cure is a sand pearl from Damcian, Cecil and Rydia set off in that direction. They team up with the sage Tella in the underground waterway, as he is also going to Damcian in pursuit of his daughter Anna and the bard she eloped with. The three of them witness the Red Wings bomb the castle and seize the fire crystal. Inside, they meet the bard, who's actually Prince Edward Chris von Muir, and Anna, who is mortally wounded. Anna stops her father from attacking Edward and dies in his arms. Edward explains that she shielded him from the attack, which also killed his parents and most of the castle, and that the Red Wings are now led by a man named Golbez. Enraged, Tella leaves to seek revenge. Although Edward's paralyzed by grief, Rydia and Cecil berate him, and Edward agrees to help them find the sand pearl. They go to the antlion's den and defeat the antlion, obtaining the needed item. The pearl cures Rosa, and she informs them that Baron is planning to attack Fabul for the Crystal of Wind. She joins the party despite Cecil's protests, and they set off. When they cross Mount Hobbs, they meet a Fabul monk named Yang Fang Liden. Together, they warn the king of Fabul of the impending attack and prepare a defense. However, the Red Wings' assault is too strong and they are driven back to the Crystal Room, where Cain appears and attacks Cecil. When Rosa makes him hesitate, Golbez arrives and incapacitates all of the defenders. Seeing Cecil's concern for Rosa, Golbez abducts her and departs with his forces. Cecil, Rydia, Edward, and Yang immediately go after them. Their ship, however, is attacked by the sea monster Leviathan, which swallows Rydia and shipwrecks Cecil alone on the shores of Mysidia. The townspeople are hostile and inflict various status effects on him in revenge for the Red Wings' attack. Cecil meets with the Elder, who tells him to go to Mount Ordeals and become a paladin to atone for his crimes. He assigns the twin mages Palom and Porum to accompany him. Golbez sends the Archfiend of Earth, Scarmiglione, to stop Cecil, but the party defeats him. A mysterious voice at the summit calls Cecil his son, and tells him to vanquish the Dark Knight. Cecil transforms into a paladin and is attacked by a doppelganger of his Dark Knight's self, but he correctly defends rather than attacking, and it disappears. The voice of his father grants Cecil his light. The encounter also restores Tella's memory, and he learns Meteor. The Elder gives Cecil the Mythgraven blade and tells him of the Mysidian legend, believing it speaks of Cecil. Cecil and the others now infiltrate Baron via the Devil's Road. Golbez has manipulated the soldiers of Baron, and the king is revealed to be Cognazo, the elemental archfiend of water. Yang has also been brainwashed, but a fight brings him back to his senses and he rejoins the party. They destroy the traitorous Bagan and the false king, but Cognazo locks them into a death trap. Palom and Porum petrify themselves to stop the walls from crushing the others and cannot be restored. Cid, who escaped imprisonment and joined the party in the battle, gives them his newest airship, the Enterprise. They encounter the brainwashed Kane in the Red Wing fleet, who forces Cecil to retrieve the Crystal of Earth in exchange for Rosa's life. The party goes to Troia, but find that the crystal was stolen by the Dark Elf. They also find Edward in the Trojans' care, having been severely injured in the shipwreck. He gives them a whisper weed and uses it to help them defeat the Dark Elf from the hospital, despite his condition. In gratitude, the Ipops allow Cecil to borrow the crystal. Cecil immediately takes it to the Tower of Zot, and they fight their way past the Mega Sisters to the top. Cecil gives Golbez the crystal unquestioningly, but Golbez refuses to return Rosa. Tella steps forward and casts the meteor spell to avenge Anna, and while it does not kill Golbez, it does break his hold on Kane. Golbez cannot bring himself to kill Cecil and retreats. Tella dies from the power of the spell, lamenting that he died for revenge before asking Cecil to avenge his death. They free Rosa, and she and Cecil share a kiss before welcoming the remorseful Kane back into the party. They defeat Barbaricia, Archfiend of Wind, and Rosa teleports them back to Baron as the tower collapses. Kane tells them that Golbez is seeking the 4 dark crystals to open the way to the moon. Using the magma stone that Golbez gave Kane, the party opens the way underground in Eggert. The Enterprise ends up in the middle of a battle between the dwarves and the Red Wings and crash near the dwarven castle. Although King Giot says his crystal is safe, the party finds the Calcabrina dolls belonging to Princess Luca are possessed. After they defeat the dolls, Golbez arrives and incapacitates them. Before he can finish them off, Rydia returns and saves them, having aged to adulthood and gained new summons in the Feymark. Golbez uses the last of his strength to steal the crystal and escape. King Giot tells the party to go to the Tower of Babel and recover the 7 stolen crystals with the help of the dwarven tanks. Cecil and company defeat the evil Dr. Lugier, but are unable to stop the tower's cannons from shelling dwarves. Yang forces them all out of the control room and sacrifices himself to destroy the artillery. Golbez attempts to kill the rest of them on the way out of the tower by removing a bridge, but Civ saves them with the Enterprise. They come under attack by the Red Wings, so Cid flies back to the Eggert entrance and jumps off to collapse it by hand detonating a bomb. A short stop in Baron has Cid's engineers upgraded the airship so it can carry the hovercraft. The party uses this to reach the Elblin Cave after finding Elbin itself deserted. There they meet Pridge Edge Geraldine, and he fails to defeat Rubicante, the Archfiend of Fire. Although he is testy at first, he joins them. They enter Babel via its cave entrance and find Edge's parents, the King and Queen, but Lugier has turned them into monsters. They regain their senses halfway through the fight and kill themselves to Edge's sorrow. Although Rubicante claims to have no hand in it, Edge swears revenge and the party attacks. Rubicante retreats and the party find the crystals in another room, but a trapdoor opens and they fall into another airship. They immediately seize it and Edge names it the Falcon. Cid, who is rescued by the dwarves, adds mithril plating to it so it can fly over lava. King Giot gives them the key to the sealed cave so they can save the last crystal. As soon as the party takes the crystal, Golbez reasserts control over Kane and forces him to steal it. Giot says that the only way to stop Golbez now would be with the legendary lunar whale. Cid attaches a drill to the Falcon so the party can return to the surface. Along the way, they visit the Feymark, land of the Adolans, and gain the powers of Leviathan and Ashura. They also find Yang recovering in the Sylph Cave and revive him with a frying pan given to him by his wife Sheila, because nothing is worse than the anger of a housewife. On the surface, they find King Baron's spirit in the bottom of Baron Castle, and he is turned into the Eidolon Odin. They defeat him and gain the new summon. The party goes to Mysidia, where the Elder gathers everyone at the Tower of Prayers to summon the lunar whale, an airship that's also a whale mech thing, capable of reaching the moon from the ocean. Cecil and the others take it and leave Earth. On the moon, they meet Fusoya in the Crystal Palace. He is a Lunarian, charged with watching over the rest of his race as they sleep. He explains that they once tried to colonize the blue planet, but decided to live on the moon until they could live in peace with humans. One Lunarian named Zemus disagreed and wanted to take the planet, though he was restrained. He was still able to manipulate people on the blue planet, such as Golbez. Zemus's goal is to activate the Giant of Babel to wipe out the world's population. Fusoya also reveals that his younger brother Cluya went to the blue planet to teach the natives and fathered 2 sons, one of whom is Cecil. Accompanied by Fusoya, who can neutralize the Giant of Babel's force field, Cecil returns to the blue planet to find the giant revived. The entire world, including former party members Edward, Cid, Yang, Palom, and Porum, participate in the counterattack. After using Cid's airship to break into the giant, the party defeats the archfiends one after the other and destroys the CPU. When the giant stops, Golbez confronts the party, intent on destroying them. Fusoya breaks Zemus's mind control, and Golbez remembers that he is Cecil's older brother. After humans killed Cluya and Cecilia, his wife, died in childbirth, Zemus manipulated the vulnerable child Theodore and turned him into Golbez. He and Fusoya leave the others for the moon, intending to defeat Zemus themselves. Cain, now completely freed, returns and helps the others escape from the collapsing giant. Although he feels unworthy for his part in Zemus's schemes, Cecil and Rosa assure him that he is forgiven. As they prepare to depart for the moon on the lunar whale, Cecil insists that Rosa and Rydia stay behind. Though they apparently leave, they reveal themselves once the ship reaches the moon and remind Cecil that they have as much stake in the battle as he does, and that their skills are essential to the party. The crystals of the moon transport the party to the lunar subterrane, which they traverse to the lunar core. There they find Fusoya and Golbez. Cecil and the others watch Golbez and Fusoya defeat Zemus, but his death unleashes a more powerful being named Zeromus, the embodiment of Zemus's reborn spirit and hatred. Zeromus defeats Golbez and Fusoya, then attacks the rest of Cecil's party. Their former allies gather at the Tower of Prayers to restore them to life, and Cecil uses a crystal given to him by Golbez to make Zeromus invulnerable. After Zeromus's defeat, Fusoya returns to sleep with the rest of his people. Golbez, feeling that he cannot return to the earth after what he has done, and being half Lunarian himself, goes with him. Cecil finally forgives him and calls him brother. Later, the moon heads off into space, and many of the characters return to their homes, several in order to rebuild them. Edward becomes king of Damcian, Edge becomes king of Eblan, and Yang and Sheila become the new king and queen of Fabul. Cain goes to Mount Ordeals to train himself, vowing not to return to Baron until he has proved himself worthy. Everyone but Cain attends Cecil and Rosa's wedding, and coronation as king and queen of Baron. Nobuo Uematsu again returned to compose for the series. Final Fantasy IV was a big development in terms of music, because up until then, the games had one piece of music per map, but for Final Fantasy IV, they focused on how to make the game more emotional and to have the music play at the right timing. Final Fantasy IV's soundtrack is the first to include a piano collections album, a practice that continued in the series afterwards. Another arranged album, Final Fantasy IV Celtic Moon, was released as well, performed by Marie Bretnock in the style of Celtic music. Both arrangements were issued to critical acclaim. The music of Final Fantasy IV has remained popular since its release, especially in Japan. The track Theme of Love has even been taught to Japanese schoolchildren as part of the music curriculum. Additionally, the Black Mages have arranged 2 pieces from Final Fantasy IV. These are Battle with the Four Fiends, an arrangement of the Dreadful Fight, and Zeromus, an arrangement of the Final Battle, both of which can be found on the album The Skies Above, published in 2004. A lyrical version of Theme of Love, sung by Risa Oki, appeared on Final Fantasy Prey, a compilation album produced by Square. Additionally, lyrical versions of the main theme of Final Fantasy IV and Edward's Harp, sung by Risa Oki and Ikuko Noguchi, appeared on Final Fantasy Love Will Grow. Uematsu continues to perform certain pieces in his Dear Friends Music from Final Fantasy concert series. The music of Final Fantasy IV has also appeared in various concerts and live albums, such as 2002-0220, Music from Final Fantasy, a live recording of an orchestra performing music from the series including several pieces from the game. Red Wings, Theme of Love, and Ending Theme were played by the Tokyo Philharmonic Orchestra in their first orchestral game concert in 1991, as part of a 5-concert tour, which was later released as a series of albums. Additionally, Theme of Love was performed by the Royal Stockholm Philharmonic Orchestra for the Distant Worlds Music from Final Fantasy concert tour, as well as by the New Japan Philharmonic Orchestra in the Tour de Japan Music from Final Fantasy concert series. Independent but officially licensed releases of Final Fantasy IV music have been composed by such groups as Project Majestic Mix, which focuses on arranging video game music. Another popular album release was Echoes of Betrayal, Light of Redemption, an unofficial download-only album release by the remix website Overclocked Remix on July 19, 2009, collecting 54 remixes over 4 discs. Selections also appear on Japanese remix albums called Dojin Music and on English remixing websites. Next up in our series is Did you really think I was done? Not by a long shot.